My name is Mardi McBrien, and I'm the Managing Director at the Climate Disclosure Standards Board. At CDSB, we were set up in 2007 at the World Economic Forum to think about how we could include climate risk and opportunity in companies' mainstream reporting. So we were a little way ahead of our time to something which has now become, or being asked of companies to be, business as usual. And we do that via reporting in a framework. So to this date, we're still chaired by the World Economic Forum. Our members include organizations such as the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, the World Resources Institute, and we're housed inside CDP, or formerly known as the Carbon Disclosure Project. And so what made me think about this webinar today and why this is so special to me is in February, before we entered into slightly unusual times that COVID-19 have found us in, I undertook Leadership Quest 3 Horizons training, along with Carolyn Maddox, who's on with us today, and under the very steady hands of Bill Sharpe, who is the author of the 3 Horizons and also a futurist. And as while I was doing that, but I guess I'll go back to the beginning. Why did I do that training? I mean, why did I think that was important to me? And CDSB at a sort of 13, 14-year juncture, starting to feel like we might have got to the first part of our, our first part of our mission done. TCFD had adopted some of our work, and we needed to think bigger, bolder for the future, or where we done, and should we give up? And well, not give up, but our mission's achieved. Do we go and do something else, right? Go and put our energy somewhere else. So I needed to have a pause and have a really good think about CDSB's future, our strategy, our direction, and think about practical ways to consider conversations about what the short, medium, and long term look like for us. So how was I going to think about navigating these tricky conversations with my team, my board, our stakeholders, our audience, the governments around the world that we support, how I was going to think about evolution of that, maybe even actually completely reimagining what CDSB could offer in service of our vision, which is really people, capital market, and ultimately the planet, and what actions did we need to take to do that. So whilst in the training, I not only was I just thinking about CDSB, but it led me to think about all the work we do supporting companies and regulators around the world to adopt the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure recommendations, whether that be at policy level to make companies and investors do them, or actually supporting companies to do it themselves. And it made me reflect on all of the various commitment companies are making at the moment. So beyond climate, so we've got all the 1.5 degree, 2 degree commitments. We've also got many other commitments. We've got zero palm oil, deforestation free. We've got clean water commitments. Many, many, many commitments are being made, often without really thinking about what that means for the business in the short, medium, and long term, and what that may mean from even a radical overhaul of that business, and then what steps need to be taken to put that into action. And I was also thinking that scenario analysis is a really big step change in what the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures recommended. People have absolutely, the biggest amount of feedback we get at CDSB, other than, we're not really seeing the financial impacts of climate, but that be positive or negative, appearing on balance sheets. We're really, companies are really, and individuals are getting really stuck with this idea of scenario analysis. So I started to play around a bit about how some of these other tools that are in the market, like 3 Horizons, could help companies start thinking about the actions they can take, and maybe even where they want to go with some of what scenarios they even want to map in the first place. So I was thinking about this, how we do this across targets, vision, future visions for business, what considerations and what needs to be done differently. And I thought about what Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, the chair of the TCFD, said, which was those businesses that fail to adapt to this transition to net zero world will cease to exist. And I thought, well, that's one state, that's one horizon, is a failure to exist. That's business as usual, I guess, isn't it? We need to think about what those other states and horizons we're looking at. And we need to think about what that new normal or that new state would look like. And so the 3 Horizons has been really an interesting tool for me, not just from thinking about CDSB, but even just in sometimes my day-to-day life, applying it to different scenarios. So, and it really is, and I mean, I can't stress this enough, it's not just a tool for analysis and thinking, but it's actually a really good tool for actioning and doing. So thank you. So for those of you that have joined me on webinars recently, you'll know I'm all about action. We need, this stuff, we need to be moving faster. We're not going fast enough to be getting to our 1.5 degree targets or meeting many of our environment SDGs, for example, environmental goals. So I'm all about action too. So I'm delighted that we have Carolyn and Bill with us today to introduce us to the 3 horizons. And I urge you all, while you're on this call, much like I did while I was on the training program, really start to think how you can apply it to everything you do, but your visions and future to get us to that better state. So we're going to start off. I'm going to hand over to Caroline, who's going to give us a bit of an introduction to Leaders Quest. Thank you, Caroline.
Well, thank you so much, Mardi. Bill and I are absolutely delighted to be here today, and thank you for inviting us. So I'm Carolyn Maddox. I am chair of the Leaders Quest Advisory Board, but I'm also a private equity investor with a focus on impact investing, by which I mean backing companies to make a good return, but also to have a social or environmental impact. So Leaders Quest has actually spent the last 20 years helping companies align profit and purpose. We very ambitiously focus on how we can create a more compassionate, wise, and sustainable world where everybody can live within the means of the planet. So we work with all leaders, from the top teams at global companies to grassroots activists who are very much on the front line of today's challenges. One of the constants we've found in our work has been the very real need to help people imagine the kind of world they want to help create, and how to go about this in a realistic and practical way, as Mardi said, action orientated. And that seems even more necessary right now as we're operating in a global pandemic and the climate crisis is completely upon us. So fortunately for us, we have our long-term friend and mentor, Bill Sharpe, who has dedicated his extensive career to figuring out just how to do that. And together, we've used 3 horizons as a methodology across a vast range of topics. So ranging from policy asks to the EU Commission to reaching net zero carbon by 2050. So we found the framework to be useful and intuitive. Like Mardi, I learnt about it a lot more in our course in February, but I'm relieved and delighted to say that we have Bill here today, who I'm going to hand over to right now to give you a good introduction to 3 horizons. And after that, I'm just going to give you a few reflections as an investor on the value of 3 horizons to me in thinking about my career. And then we're going to have a conversation between the 3 of us, hopefully aided by some great questions from all of you. So thanks so much. And Bill, over to you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Mardi. So I think I have a very good job, which is I spend my time working with people like all of you on this call who are dedicating themselves to creating a better world. And just a little bit more of the background, my reason for doing this sort of work with 3 horizons and futures tools came out of my career, which was in fact in the computer industry. The bulk of my career was in the research and development end of that, first working for a big company, Hewlett-Packard, then having my own innovation consultancy. And of course, the computer industry is a great lab for change, because transformational change comes with the territory. Every 10 to 15 years, there's a complete transformation of the industry with new leaders emerging and old players finding themselves no longer at the center of the action. So you get to see how change happens, and you get to use futures tools because you're always having to work with both your own ambition towards the future, but also with the inherently uncertain nature of how that's all going to turn out. But it is for about the last 20 years that I've been bringing all that learning out into this question of, well, how are 10 billion people going to thrive on one planet? And seeing how can we have some sort of shared practices around both how do we work with the future and how do we work with systems change. And that's what I'm going to share with you today. This practice of 3 horizons, as Carolyn said, has emerged out of futures work and systems work. And it's just a very simple way of allowing groups of people to come together and have a better conversation than they would otherwise about how to bring about change and how to face the uncertainty of the future. Now, Mardi mentioned scenarios, and I'd just like to put this 3 horizons practice into the bigger field of futures and systems work. Now, if we were all sitting in a room, I could just ask you all, what word would you most associate with the quality of the future? And I guess if I ask that question of people, then the one that usually comes up is it's uncertain, which breaks down into, well, we don't know what it is, so there are aspects of it that are unknown because they're going to be invented, aspects of it that are simply uncertain, we don't know which way it's going to go. So the first dominant quality that we have to work with is this notion that it's uncertain or unknown. And that contains both the sense of opportunity, there are new things we can do, and the sense of risk that we're going to have to respond to things that we just can't predict. But the other aspect of it is this element that although we don't know what the future could be, every morning we get up and we act and we do things as if we did know what it's going to be. So in thinking about how to work with the future, we both work with the fact that it's uncertain, but we also work with the fact that we have some agency towards it. We have some ability to act. And the ways that we can work on the future depend on our approach to these 2 things. And I realize I needed to start the Zoom share so we can do this properly. We've got uncertainty. What's the future going to be? And we've got our ability to act, which we talk of as agency. Can I just check, is that turning up all right?
Yes.
Good. So there are basically, as in all good management things, a 2x2, 4 ways we can deal with this. And down in the bottom left here is the world of conventional business forecasting. This is where, if the past is a reasonably good model of the future, if we can use our expectations of what happened yesterday as a reasonable predictor of tomorrow, we can do the numbers, we can have predictions. They won't be right, but they give us an idea. We'll have something that's a high one, something that's a low one, and something in the middle. What's the budget? What's the fuel consumption of the world going to be? And we can make our plans based on that with some sort of contingency. So where the past is a guide to the future, that's the world of plans and forecasts. But as we go up here and we bring more and more players into the story and more aspects of the future into the story, as the world gets more complex, we face what some people call this complexity barrier, where the model of the past is no longer going to be a model of the future. And so then the classic response has been, say, well, we know what we want to do, we've got a plan in place, but we've got to manage the risks, so we'll build scenarios. I think most of you on this call are very familiar with the idea of scenario planning, which the most basic is just to have a 2x2 matrix of what are the most important uncertainties to deal with. And then we tell stories about those futures. And we use those stories as sort of wind tunnels. So we say, well, supposing if we're a financial company, the euro is going to fall apart, or is it going to survive? And will the World Trade Organization still function, or will it disintegrate? Then we get different stories, and we can make sure that our future plans are going to be in some sense tested against those futures. But scenarios do not in themselves generate action. There are ways of exploring and the strategies that you've got. The other place to go, and particularly if you're a technologist, is roadmaps. So here the response is to say, we don't want uncertainty. If we bring enough of the players together, as it might be around mobile telephony, then we can plot a path into the future, generation 1, 2, 3, 4, and of course now we're on just approaching generation 5. And you can bring the different players together and with some degree of certainty say, if we take this step, then we'll be able to take the next step, and we'll take the next step after that. So we push the uncertainty out and focus just on mapping the piece that we can do. But now that we're in the world where we've got to bring everybody along, the whole world needs to change. We can't roadmap the whole thing. There are too many moving parts. We've got to move with a sense of urgency where we still haven't discovered all the things we need to discover. So there's an inherent uncertainty about the whole story. And the practices we need here are increasingly being known as pathways, where we take a step, but we take a step both to get something done, but also to learn and to open up the possibilities of the future. So these pathways are inherently known as adaptive pathways to the future. And Three Horizons is a practice that has grown out of this space. It isn't the only approach. You'll be familiar perhaps with the Presencing Institute of Otto Scharmer and the work of people like Rios Partners and Transformative Scenarios. So you can bring other practices up into this space. But the one I'm going to share with you today is Three Horizons. Sits in this space. Okay, so Three Horizons is just a really simple framework. Along the axis here, we put time. And up here, we just plot what's the most important pattern of life at any particular time. If you prefer the word, you could say system, but I prefer the word pattern because we all have a natural appreciation of the patterns of life, whereas system is just somewhat of a technical word. So pattern or system, whatever you like. And the basic idea of Three Horizons is to pay attention to what patterns of life are in play that are repeating themselves every day, and that therefore we're looking to transform in any particular situation. And we start with the first horizon, which is the business as usual. And the business as usual, the orientation to that is, it's what we expect to be running when we get up in the morning, that the electricity will run, we'll be able to get on the train to go to work or whatever it is, that the computing infrastructure will let us do what we want. And if we're having a Three Horizon conversation, it's because that pattern is in some sense losing its fit to emerging conditions. Of course, everybody on this call knows there are many respects in which our routine business as usual ways of working are losing their fit to emerging conditions. Now, as well as being a description of the pattern, it's also a way of looking at the world. The first horizon orientation is a managerial view. You know, if you're on this call a lot, I should think about what it means to be responsible for a pattern, but also to expect other people to be responsible for it, to serve the integrity of that pattern, not to be corrupt, not to undermine it. So that's all about keeping things going as they are. The third horizon, if we're looking at change, is the pattern that will come into existence over time and take over from the existing first horizon pattern. So that's Horizon 3. And Horizon 3 is already there in its beginning form, in the form of the visions that we hold and the visionaries who hold them. So depending where we are in the process of change, that might be quite a long way out, or it might be beginning to emerge into view. One example I often think of is Elon Musk and his ambition to put humans on Mars, turn us into a multiplanetary species. That seems a pretty long way out to me, but there's no doubt that that is a vision of the future. And you can only interpret what he's doing now fully in terms of executing on that vision. So then in between the two is the space of the entrepreneur. Very word, the sense of being between the two. And the entrepreneurial space is where people are trying out the new things. They're innovating in light of what's been happening in the past, the signs of stress in the first horizon system, and also with the sense of opportunity in the third. And they're moving into this space, trying things out. And in the nature of the case, this is a very turbulent region. So one way to look at it is that when the process of change gets underway, at some point, the first horizon begins to show that it's no longer completely in control of things, and new innovative ways of doing things are beginning to emerge. But we're in a period of transition and change, and it's only when we come out over here that the new normal will get established, when the new winners and losers finally get established. So there are sort of three stages of change that we can see here. There's a sort of envisaging stage, enrolling, and mobilizing. Going back to the computer industry, I'm old enough to have lived through the whole story of the move to the web. Before the web happened, there was a long stage where there were lots of visions of the future information superhighway and information at your fingertips, and every company had its story, and we were moving into this space of the second horizon. But it was only when the web was invented, that everybody could come together and start to adopt this new infrastructure. And that became eventually where all the money moved, and all the money then got released out of the old telecoms infrastructure and switched over to building out the new web-based internet infrastructure. So massive change from an old telecom world in the first horizon to an internet and web world in Horizon 3. Now, one of the really valuable things that we get out of using this model is that, as well as describing a process of change, these three voices, the first, the H1, H2, H3, as I say, are all present at any one time. If you look at any aspect of change, like the ones we're very involved in on this call of climate change, you'll find that these three voices are always in dialogue with one another, and they're typically having a not very positive dialogue. If you've ever been a visionary talking to a manager, or vice versa, the manager who's responsible for keeping things going day to day, and you're talking to a visionary, you'll probably be familiar with how that turns out. So imagine yourself, you're the first Horizon manager, and somebody comes into your office with this new idea, Carolyn will give an example later on new models of investing, and they say, look, I've got this completely new model that I think we can implement, where we're not just going to look at the profit of the company, we're going to look at its impact in society. And the first Horizon manager will say, well, that's all very well, but that's not what I can do. You're just not being realistic. That's not where the future lies. We'll go back 20 years and talk about photovoltaics, energy supplying the world, and people will say, look, it's far too expensive. It'll never work at any reasonable volume. You're just wasting my time. So what we see is that these two ways of looking at the world tend to take completely dismissive views of the other. And we call these the horizon mindsets. That the first horizon thinks the third horizon is just irrelevant, or off with the fairies, just not really relevant to the world at large. And the third horizon tends to look at the first and see obstruction, dinosaur, doesn't really get that the future is going to be different. And we call these horizon mindsets. And you might think that the second horizon would be in a positive relationship with the other two, but you get the same sort of phenomenon there, that from the first horizon point of view, the second looks too risky. And from the point of view of the third horizon, the second often looks like a bit of a cop-out. Imagine you were trying to pioneer electric vehicles and you get told by the manager, well, we'll maybe try a hybrid, or we'll just take a little step in the water here, toe in the water here. So what we've noticed is that most three horizon conversations start with people taking these negative mindsets. The idea of a mindset I think of as a way of looking at the world that you don't notice that you've got. So you're not really aware that you're holding that as just the right position in the world. But you can move from the negative into the positive. So one way we look at these is, say like this, the negative mindsets moving over into the positive perspectives. Once you become aware of these three different ways of looking at the world, and that they're all present at once, you can make a move from the negative over to the positive. If you're the H2 entrepreneur trying to get on with it, you realize that before you've gone very far, you're going to need the support and the resources of the first horizon to come with you, like that transition from the old telecom infrastructure to the internet. It required all the resources of the old telecom companies to come into play and to be put into that building out that new infrastructure. At the same time, from the first step you take, as an entrepreneur, you have to focus on your very first product or innovation. You want to look out to the third horizon and see that there's more where that came from, that there are future steps that you can take and future ideas you can build on. And as a third horizon player, you realize you need that energy of the second horizon who's going to just get something going. And you need to have that as a partner to whom you can really work on the future things that you'll be able to deliver later. and you're going to need all the capabilities of the first horizon brought to bear to build out and build the new normal. So, basic idea of 3 horizons, a way of bringing together both our intent, our sense of working with a sense of intent, and working with uncertainty, being able to work with the emerging future, holding the visionary possibilities in view, but getting into action in the second horizon. And I think I'll just pause there and invite questions and responses.
We have 2 questions, Bill. We have the first one, which is a sort of a practical one. The Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures asks for at least 2 scenarios to be assessed, one on 2 degrees and one below or above. And this person on the call would like to know if, in fact, they should be asking for 3 sort of tunnels, one at sort of H1, one at H2, and one at H3, to allow for some of that other sort of thinking to be taken into account in action.
Well, I'm not sure I'm getting the question right. The use of scenarios in the sort of IPC sense is telling us what sort of climate we can expect given different degrees of ambition on the actions that we actually take. I think the use of 3 horizons would help you say, well, supposing we are trying to reach the 1.5 degree scenario in that sense, what sort of future have we got to paint in the 3rd horizon that's going to be a realistic story that we can reach, and what sort of innovations are going on in the 2nd horizon that are actually taking us on that path, and are they sufficient, and what would we need to do to actually make them strong enough to actually reach that. So I think what I'd first do would be to build out that 3 horizon picture of our destination, which is the net zero by 2050, and the innovations that we're building in the 2nd horizon towards it, and then see how do they relate to the outcomes in terms of the different levels of outcome. Maybe we should come back to that at the end, if that's not a...
Yeah, no, I think that was a great answer. And there's just one more quick question here. One of our participants today would like to will be hosting a 3 Horizons workshop on the future economic collaborative systems at an EU event, and they have 90 minutes to do it, and it'll be online. Is that long enough?
If you have a 90-minute conversation, you'll get a 90-minute answer. So that's like any topic. So you'll get the quality of outcome that reflects the degree of time and attention you can give to something. The great value I've found in 3 Horizons over scenarios and other methods is that scenario planning is wonderful if you've got the time and the resources, but it takes a long time to do it, and a long time to do it well. But 3 Horizons is better than nothing. So it means you can have a 3 horizon conversation in 90 minutes, a couple of hours, and at least make some progress on feeling that you've understood your situation a bit better. What I'd usually suggest is having one 90-minute one to build your map, and then put it aside and come back another day and do the action planning as a 2-step process, and that just allows a little settling time. We could bring that up in the questions again on all the tools and resources that are available for doing something like that. Okay, let me hand over to Carolyn, who's going to talk through her experience of this, particularly from impact investing. Carolyn.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you so much for a wonderful introduction to 3 Horizons. So, as I said at the start, I am a private equity investor, and way back in time, in 2002, I was one of 3 partners who founded an impact investing private equity fund, which initially focused on investing in the most deprived or underserved areas of the UK. And then we broadened our impact remit to investing in companies which had real social impact or environmental impact. And I suppose at the time you could have seen us as H2 disruptors. We can talk a little bit more about that with Bill later. but it was quite clear to us when we tried to raise our first fund that the investing community were very much in what Bill would describe as an H1 mindset. So most investors didn't believe at that time that you could invest in private equity funds to have social impact. They believed they invested for big returns and that social impact was achieved via the world of donations or grants. We, however, believed that the two could go hand in hand. And I think reflecting back on that experience, what would have been super helpful to us at that time would have been to have the Three Horizons framework, where we could have mapped out in a very structured and thoughtful way how we were going to deploy that first fund, which was 40 million, in order to achieve both good financial returns, but also social and environmental impact. And to an extent, though I hate to say it, we were probably investing at the time slightly stabbing in the dark. We got there in the end. We did prove that you could make strong returns and have social environmental impact, but it didn't always go well. So for example, we made 3 or 4 investments in the environmental space, which were in the H2 horizon, but only one of them really worked. It was a really tough area at that time to invest in. However, we conversely set up a startup which was in the area of low-cost gyms. In fact, we were the pioneer at starting low-cost gyms in the UK. We had an investment committee that didn't believe it would work because there were so many big players that made a lot of money and that seemed to have everything right, that they didn't believe that a nimble, low-cost player could actually work. So we invested in stages, but it turned out that it was a very successful commercial investment, but also it had big social impact because it was addressing one of the societal problems of obesity and making gyms affordable to those who couldn't afford the large prices of the normal gym. So in the end, we got to an H3 horizon in that fund that we founded in 2002 now has over 1 billion under management and is investing across growth areas, property, and also sustainable long-term funds, which perhaps have lower returns, but have higher impact. And then I was just reflecting on Three Horizons right now and what's it like as an investor, thinking about what it would be useful to invest in right now. So we know in this global pandemic that the areas of technology and probably healthcare are going to do well or are doing well right now. But how could we use Three Horizons to actually map out in a more detailed and a more structured way what might work really well to invest in right now, perhaps addressing climate issues, etc. And then I suppose lastly, just at a fundamental level, Three Horizons is just a wonderful framework for any company, small or large, in terms of how it thinks about its planning, its strategy for the future. So I'm going to leave it at that, and perhaps Mardi, invite you to talk a little bit about how that resonates with you. What parallels do you see, and how could this sort of framework be useful for your audience and the people on our call today?
Thank you both, Carolyn and Bill. Really, really interesting. And I feel like I was in class all over again when Bill had the whiteboard up there with drawing lines and forcing me to think and listen and think differently. But where I think, you've mentioned some really good examples, Carolyn, about where this fits. But I think where I think this is also really helpful and in the strategic plan in the future and going even as a starting point well before scenarios or after scenarios driving action is often as a framework for bringing diverse groups of participants and audience voices together and sort of working through, sort of feeling like you can all be heard and all go on that journey journey together, because, you know, I even think from my team, but right out to working across companies, businesses, across sectors, and then we're all trying to influence someone somewhere, aren't we? And how we think about those different voices and where they actually sit and how to target them. So I found the diagrams that Bill had up on the horizon perspectives, both the positive and the negative, the different directions of travel. If you actually, when you're thinking about the future that we want and how to get there, and you're going into a conversation, say, for example, maybe me going to a policy conversation, thinking about where that policy advisor is at now and where we need the world to get to. And obviously that sort of entrepreneurial journey in the middle, and the different ways of thinking about bringing the old and the new and the ally and the different groups in. I thought it could actually be very powerful for everyone in their thinking if they had those two diagrams up on their wall next to them when they're going into any conversation. I think with, you know, I often feel that, you know, often you go in and you think, oh goodness, it's a bit of an old school strategy here. Okay, how am I going to tackle that? If you then put that against some of those more positive perspectives and futures, you can really start to think, okay, that's where they're thinking. That's how I can address that, and that's how I can kind of target my approach to think like that. So when I saw that again, I thought, oh yeah, that's right. I really should reflect more back on those diagrams and start to apply even some of that to my visionary and day-to-day thinking, and converting that again to action. For the audiences today, you know, we're all thinking about how we need to adapt and get there further and faster and quicker in sort of systematic way as well. And I really feel that, you know, when you bring a group of people together, and Bill said you can do it we can do it in as little as 90 minutes if you need to start that conversation, but starting the conversation using that frame of thinking as a nice sort of structured way to do it, to flush out some of the challenges and to make sure everyone's on the same page. Because I know when we did this together, Carolyn, we're all sort of heading in the same direction. We're all kind of saying the same thing, but also using different words to say the same thing. And so, you know, and so just to flush that through to make sure, because it didn't take long to realize that what I was saying and what you were saying were absolutely the same thing. But I was using one way and you were saying it another way, and it's actually, oh no, but we both want the same thing. And that's very often the case in business and across industries and across, you know, the Australians will say it one way and the Europeans will say it another, but essentially they're saying exactly the same thing. And it's often confusion that is seen as a way people aren't taking action. Oh, it's a bit too confusing. I don't know where to start. I don't know what I'm doing. Or there's too many different ways. This is a really simple way to cut through all of that noise and actually start thinking and getting started and starting that conversation. So that's quite a long-winded approach to your answer, Carolyn. I'm so excited. Sorry, everyone. It's you all know that me by now. If I get really excited about something, I can't stop talking about it.
I think what's also quite interesting, Mardi, I'm just remembering one of the examples that we used in our course with Bill, and Bill might want to talk about it, but we broke into groups and we used an example of Horizon 1. We were looking at mobility. We used Horizon 1 as Daimler, I think, or Daimler, and Horizon 2 was Tesla. And Horizon 3 was Rivercell, I think, a company looking at hydrogen fuel technology. And it was interesting in the groups how I think I was Tesla, and it was quite easy being Tesla, but it was harder being Daimler because you felt as if you were a bit of a dinosaur. And yet there were aspects of that company and that H1 horizon that need to be really valued, right? You know, it's a really strong, incredible engineering company doing fantastic things. But it's interesting how your mindset could be quite disapproving as you were thinking of these wonderful H2 and H3 horizons. And I just think it's quite an interesting way of getting every voice in the room, but also remembering to honor each of the horizons. I don't know whether, Bill, you want to comment on that.
Yeah, a couple of things. A good piece of advice is, you know, don't make the past wrong. Now, sometimes the past is wrong. There are things we need to overcome, but very often the first horizon was there for a very good reason. It was the third horizon once. It reflected ambitions and aspirations in the past. So we don't label people as first, second, or third horizon, but we recognize that the patterns and systems that we're part of may be first, second, and third. So I think the first point is being able to distinguish the two and enroll the people in having that dialogue around, well, what have we got to let go of? What have we got to decommission? If you hear Christiana Figueres talking about the transition, she'll say, you know, fossil fuels, internal combustion engine, they were great, but their time is over. Send them to the museum. You know, we just have to recognize that their time is over, and we've got to build the new. But then the second question, and it can be a very tough one to answer, is if you're trying to change the system, do you do it by recruiting First Horizon or by challenging them? We celebrate the way markets allow new people, new entrants to come along and basically challenge the old, and then they either have to respond and be part of the new, or they will get left behind. And it's actually quite unusual for the dominant company of the First Horizon, the dominant players in the marketplace, to successfully navigate through and still be the winners in the next generation. They can, but it's really a very tough job to pull off. And I think Clayton Christensen really illuminated this. He's celebrated for inventing the idea of disruptive innovation, the new player who starts at the margins and comes in and takes over the system. I think one of the most important things was the subtitle of his book, which is How Good Management Causes Great Companies to Fail. The starting point of his research and a critical insight was that the managers, in this case in the big computer company DEC that most people won't remember, weren't bad managers. They were following the market in front of them very well, but that caused them to be literally unable to shift the company onto the new. So I think the point here is to be very pragmatic and sort of clear-eyed about this, that the incumbents will usually try to maintain their position because that is what the market and the society is typically asked to do. And therefore it may be extraordinarily difficult to generate momentum unless at least they feel some degree of challenge from new entrants. So one of the biggest problems in bringing out change is what we call Horizon 1 capture, where they sort of allow and sort of talk about the new, but actually it's all what we would call H2 minus. One of our colleagues in the Welsh Assembly who's using this a lot likes the example of Sony and the mini disc versus Apple and the iPod. That the mini disc was what we'd call an H2 minus innovation. It was looking backwards to the old model of the Walkman, whereas Apple was looking forward to where the new, and the iPod was what we'd call an H2 plus innovation. It was the sort of innovation that puts you in a position to move into the emerging third horizon. Yeah, so that's how I think about that.
But we have another question in the chat. It's just coming to me privately. How can we use the 3 horizons for rethinking the financial system?
Oh, I think I'll hand this back to Carolyn in a moment, but that's something that Leaders Quest is doing a huge amount on, that there is a huge amount of work in the second horizon of the new economy and reinventing capitalism and making it fit for purpose to reintegrate the human economy with the natural economy. I mean, this is one of those things that a little while ago appeared just fantastical, and now we see as an absolute imperative. So 3 Horizons is a very good tool for that, and we've been using it in precisely that way to help us organize that thinking around how do we make a transition from an economic system that is not integrated with the well-being of planet and people into one that genuinely is. So it's a very, very good tool for organizing that, and our Leaders Quest colleagues are assembling a lot of good resources around that. Carolyn, would you like to say more on that?
Yes, so this is a big part of what Leaders Quest is doing right now, so looking at the world of regenerative economics. And actually from an investor perspective, looking over the last 15 years, there has been, if we look at environmental, social and governance funds, there has been an absolute huge increase in the amount of money. I think it's 20% now of financial assets are invested in so-called ESG funds. So where investors do worry about the planet. And actually, just for reference, some of you may know the firm, but I was talking about investing in private companies. There is a very interesting investor called Generation Investment Management, which was founded by Al Gore, and they invest in public markets. So they have, I think, about $20 billion under management, and they only started in 2004. and they are very thoughtful about investing within planetary means. And for those of you that are interested, actually, they have just published an impact and trends report, which is really interesting because it's focused on where we are now, investing in the pandemic, and what we're going to do, not just about climate, but also about inequality in the world. So for those of you that are interested, I would suggest that you might like to have a look at that.
Thanks, Carolyn. They've also got a question here, how we can use it in implementing the TCFD. So I'm going to draw back quickly, and then I'll hand over to Carolyn to answer this as well. Where I see it, the very first place you can use it is with TCFD. They've got obviously the 4 sort of buckets. You've got the risk, strategy, governance, and then the metrics and targets. And the most important part of this is really setting the strategy and laying out your roadmap about where you're going to go with TCFD. You can do all the other, the scenarios, which will also take a long time. All of that can come later. But where Three Horizons really can be useful is helping to set that strategy, to bring the governance together, to bring the people, the people in your organization together, and actually start to think about where you are now and where you want to go. What's your vision? What's your vision in the short, medium, but also the very long term, which is what TCFD is asking you to do. Capital markets are now not investing just for the short term. They are investing for the long term, as Carolyn has said. And for that, you need to be able to talk about your long-term vision as part of your strategy, how your company is going to create and sustain value in the long term. And I think Three Horizons can really come into its own, helping you tell that story. Do you agree, Carolyn?
I would totally agree, Mardi. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fantastic framework for really forcing you in a systematic way to think about how you can bring about Horizon 3 and not to be afraid. So at the beginning, you said be action orientated. And I think that's really key because, look, some of what you might do might be so-called H2+, getting you on the way to Horizon 3. Some might be H2 negative, but you learn from everything that you do. And you can only achieve by doing, right? So I think it's a really helpful framework. And Leaders Quest is doing a lot of work in this area with, large companies and not so large companies, but clearly global companies can have a lot of impact. And Three Horizons is a fantastic framework to use when talking to those companies about how they can, plan for the future in a sustainable way.
And also communicate that. I think it's a great tool for communicating too, which is, I think, another large part of TCFD is actually being able to tell your story to the market and what you're doing. And there's a nice, for those of you that have been on the TCFD journey for a long time, there's a nice sort of 5-year implementation curve. But where it starts at the very beginning is, get your strategy, get your governance together and map out a plan. A plan for action, a plan about what you're going to do. And some of that may be scenarios further down the track, but actually what you're going to do and what that can look like and where your long-term strategy. So I think this is hugely beneficial to just get started because, we're starting to hear more and more, if everyone's been listening to what's going on policy-wise in the UK and more broadly, we are expecting consultations on mandatory TCFD reporting in the UK this year. We are expecting the non-financial reporting directive revisions in Europe to think about mandatory TCFD, and that will be a much broader scope. A lot of companies and organizations across the world really started. New Zealand's gone back, going mandatory TCFD. Japan's, relaxing investment criteria to allow for more long-term thinking, which means more long-term planning allowed to be communicated. There is an increasing demand from investors, I feel, Caroline, for the longer-term value creation story. And I couldn't say this is a good place to start. This is the best place to start.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I totally agree. And actually it resonates that there's a book that's recently come out by Rebecca Henry on reimagining capitalism. You can't get bolder than that, right? I don't know whether she's used Three Horizons, Bill, but it seemed to me that actually it would be a handy tool for her to use because this whole area of reporting and making companies accountable really comes through in her book. So, Mardi, yeah, the work you're doing is vital, right? Because it's only with that work that companies can plan and actually have a consistent methodology in terms of their reporting.
Yeah, Rebecca has been quite keen on Three Horizons, and she's using it in some of her teaching with her business students. Yeah.
Great.
Oh, fantastic. So I don't have any more questions coming through in the chat. And we're almost coming up to the hour. So I thought, first of all, I might just have a bit of a plug here for Bill's book, for those that can see it. It's called Three Horizons, The Patterning of Hope. I urge you to read it. Every time I read it, I dip into it, I learn something new. I would admit, I'm not very good at reading anything cover to cover, but it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I urge everyone to read it. I would also, I couldn't recommend more, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, Carolyn, the Future Stewards training that you and I attended, which sort of gave us 3.5 days, 4 days of really thinking this through practically together and taking us out of our comfort zones more than once, I must say, to make me really think hard. And I'm sure if my team have had to see me think that hard and really imagine something completely different, they wouldn't have believed it was me. But I found it very, very useful for many conversations that I had and much of my thinking. So I do urge you to have a look at that. And I believe the details are popping up in the chat. But if not, they'll be available. We'll have this recording available online with all of the details for Bill's book, Leaders Quest, and the training that's coming up. All of it will be available with the recording, and we'll send it around to all the participants in the coming days as it is available. If you do have any questions and you don't hear from us and you want something, just pop it to CDSB or directly to Leaders Quest, and we can point you in the right directions to the resources and the people that you need to help take this forward. But as I said at the beginning, you know, if you think, have a look at the materials, re-listen to the webinar, have a look online, have a look at Leaders Quest, have a look at the Future Stewards. Is that right? Future Steward? Is that right, Bill?
Yes, that's right. Future Stewards website.
Future Stewards website. There's lots and lots of tools and resources there to get you started. But I would urge, just get started. This can be really, really helpful, whether it be for TCFD, whether it be thinking about how your business adapts to nature-related issues or biodiversity. You know, you can apply it across just any sort of social issues. You can apply it, you know, pick a topic and go. But just get started and, you know, really think about how this can be a useful tool to not just analyze, but think about action in the future. So thank you very much, Bill and Carolyn, for joining us on this webinar today. You can tell I've really enjoyed it. I never smile this much on a webinar, but don't tell anyone else if you've joined me before. And let us know if this has been useful and what else you'd like, because we can always invite Bill and Carolyn back again and go into some more detail on another topic, thinking about the future. So thank you all, and have a lovely morning or afternoon wherever you're joining us from.